This is the new Current TV.
Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow? I'll just ask the wife. Herman Cain's first meeting with the missus since she found out he's been giving good old Ginger White money because he's a good guy.
My wife did not know about it, and that was the revelation and the surprise that my wife found out about it when she went public with it.
He also hasn't been telling his campaign staff everything.
Tomorrow in Atlanta, I will be making an announcement, but nobody's going to get me to make that prematurely.
First, they had heard of that. They said the announcement was Monday. Then they said tomorrow's announcement is not about the future of the campaign, if any. Fortunately, Cain's put up a website, Women for Cain. Those women, they're from a generic stock photo. But one comment isn't. It reads, "Dear Mrs. Cain, don't pay attention to these pathetic husbandless women who are jealous of women like you in happy long-term marriages." And Cain has put up another website, which has misspelled his first name. Newt, breakfast at Tiffany's Gingrich's answer to all this?
I'm going to be the nominee.
Well, guess who's going to be the moderator at the GOP debate on the 27th?
You're fired.
As somebody tweeted, clown to lead circus. Already true in Wisconsin. Now Governor Walker wants to charge protesters for any police required to attend their protest, plus cleanup costs. So if you get pepper sprayed, you have to pay for the cop, you have to pay for the pepper spray, you have to pay for the soap with which to clean up the pepper spray. All of which brings us back to Occupy and our special live guest tonight, Scott Olsen.
To all of them, I would have to say peaceful.
All that and more now on Countdown. Good evening from New York. This is Friday, December 2nd, 340 days until the 2012 presidential election. The first person quoted using this phrase was a World War II hero and former Dartmouth football star named Merrill Frost, getting the award for the most courageous athlete of 1945 after 18 months spent recovering from burns. He said, "They say behind every great man there's a woman. While I'm not a great man, there's a great woman behind me." Our fifth story in the countdown is Staff Sergeant Frost said, "You don't have to be a great man. Ask Herman Cain." Many indications tonight that the great woman behind him may have just kicked his sorry backside out of the presidential race. Cain surprising even his own staff at an event in Rock Hill, South Carolina today when he talked about tomorrow.
I am reassessing because of all of this media firestorm stuff. Why? Because my wife and family comes first. I got to take that into consideration. So tomorrow we're going to be opening our headquarters in Northwest Georgia, where we will also clarify, there's that word again, clarify exactly what the next steps are.
Several reports and several thousand observers suggesting Cain's next step will be out of the race and back to his book tour and career as a motivational speaker. His bizarre run ended by multiple allegations of sexual harassment when he ran the National Restaurant Association and an alleged 13-year affair with sometime fitness instructor and single mother named Ginger White. Cain insisting the affair never happened, and while he sometimes gave White money, that was purely out of the goodness of his heart. And he never told Mrs. Cain about the money until Ms. White mentioned it.
If she had been just another man that I had helped, it probably wouldn't have raised as much suspicion. But my wife is comfortable with the explanation that I told her regarding, having to help her.
Shoot. We haven't heard what that from Gloria Cain, however. She was supposed to meet her husband sometime today. Perhaps she'll clarify her next steps, too. And you know where the footprints will be. While Fox News asked an expert on how adultery can end political careers, not Newt Gingrich, rather former Republican South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford.
I would expect to see he's probably going to call it quits on the campaign. I think as a candidate and as a campaign, you have to assess, is staying in going to help the very ideas that this campaign has been based on and that I believe in, or is it going to hurt?
That's a great picture from the Appalachian Trail. Well, this hurt. The Kaine campaign has established a Women for Kaine section on its website featuring attacks on Kaine's accusers. The picture of the women there giving Mr. Kaine their thumbs up, that's a stock photo. Real women for Kaine may have been too hard to find, and so is that photo now. It's now been pulled down from the Kaine site. Kaine's super PAC also having problems with its website, like misspelling the candidate's first name. Somebody needed to tell them that there was no I in Herman. There is an I in Newt Gingrich, however. I is, in fact, his favorite word, the former House Speaker, giving himself some love via Jake Tapper of ABC News.
It's very hard not to look at the recent polls and think that the odds are very high. I'm going to be the nominee.
At least the numbers are working for him for now. A November 21st Gallup poll of Republicans and Republican leaners who've registered to vote, putting Gingrich at 22%, edging Romney at 21%, Kaine at 16%. The Gallup poll from November 27th measuring positive intensity, you don't even want to know what that is, showing Gingrich at 20% compared to 9% for Kaine and Romney. And an American Research Group poll of likely Florida Republican voters that came out yesterday, scoring Gingrich with 50%, Romney at 19%, Kaine 10%. But there are hazards ahead. The GOP debates have done in several candidates already. Michelle Bachmann and Rick Perry come readily to mind. And now a new debate has been announced for December 27th, sponsored by the ultra-conservative magazine Newsmax and hosted by GOP favorite Donald Trump.
I thought it would certainly be a little change of pace for Donald Trump. I'll do something that I've never done before, and we'll give it a shot. We'll see how it is. I think I have a lot of good questions to ask.
I doubt that. I doubt that very much. First debate ever in which the moderator may not let anybody talk except himself. Former Senator John Danforth probably agrees with me, telling a Missouri talk show host he is embarrassed by the GOP debates, not so much the candidates as what the audiences have applauded.
A statement that the governor of Texas is responsible for killing 234 people on death row, or that we favor torture, or that we're for creating a fence on the Mexican border that electrocutes people when they try to cross it. It doesn't have anything to do with the Republican Party that I was part of.
And you'll notice he's a Republican. For more on the bizarre rise and precipitous fall, perhaps, of the Kaine candidacy, I'm joined here by Salon's news editor, Steve Kornacki. It's nice to meet you, sir.
Happy to be here.
Is the Kaine candidacy over? Is there reporting to this effect tonight, besides what we just sort of assume?
Right. Well, I mean, there's two issues here, sort of, you know, he's saying he's going to take, you know, he's been taking the last few days, maybe he'll take the weekend, whatever it is, to decide, you know, the fate of his candidacy. But I think the reality is the fate of his candidacy has been decided for him already. And it's really sort of a formality at this point. Is his name on the ballot in January or not? Either way, he's not going to be a factor.
Is there anything that would have changed over the last 24 hours that adjusted this? Because clearly when he said he was going to say something tomorrow, his campaign then came out with, no, we don't have an announcement till Monday, and then they said, oh, no, we do have an announcement tomorrow, but it won't have anything to do with the future of his campaign. Some cross wires. Is there a reason for that, or just standard cross wires in this campaign?
There's not, standard for this campaign. Yes. There's no reason in normal politics to do anything the Kaine campaign has done, but that's the reason there's so much suspense over this, because this is the guy who, you know, decides he's not going to meet with an editorial board, watches them endorse another candidate, and then says, you know what, I'm going to go meet with that editorial board. That's the kind of logic that's prevailed in the Kaine campaign. So yeah, there's some genuine suspense for the first time in this campaign.
You get the feeling sometimes you're dealing with a presidential campaign trainee, that there's some sort of internship program, and then maybe he'll do it for real in 2016 or something?
I think it's a program he pioneered at Godfathers, and now he's applying it to the presidential race.
All right, the polls clearly have preceded whatever decision he's going to make. The people have bailed out on him on the Republican campaign, but he appears to be in third place. If he goes tomorrow or any other time by Monday, do those voters automatically go towards Gingrich? Is that the assumption?
I mean, at this point, yes, and for a couple of reasons. I mean, one is the pattern that sort of prevailed on the Republican side this year. The reason this race has had this kind of comical volatility to it is because Mitt Romney can't get past 25%. And what happens is every time you see, you know, a few months ago, Rick Perry was the main alternative. If you took a poll then, you know, who were the second choice for Rick Perry voters? What was Herman Cain? Who were the second choice for Herman Cain voters? If you look at those polls now, it's Newt Gingrich. You know, the favorable, there's a gap of about 40 points. When you look at Herman Cain supporters, there's a gap of 40 points in their favorable opinion of Gingrich versus Romney. So it's logical at this point that's where they do go.
Is there another way, and it's fascinating to look at these things in hindsight. I mean, it's sort of assumed now that in 1972, even after he sort of surreptitiously padded his win in the presidential election, even at that point, if Richard Nixon had come out before the inauguration and said, yeah, about this Watergate thing, let me tell you what actually happened. We're very sorry. The following people are going to be fired, and following people are going to prison, and I'm turning over these tapes that I happen to have. He would have served out his term. Almost no question that he would not have had to resign, and any impeachment attempt against him would have probably been futile. Is there something Herman Cain could have done? Because frankly, if he's turning over leadership here in the GOP race to Newt Gingrich over an issue of sexual conduct and behavior towards women,
right,
he must have screwed something up, because Gingrich is still standing and Cain is not.
Well, I think what Herman Cain screwed up is probably a 10-year process. If he had said all of this years ago, oh, by the way, I had an affair on my wife, if that's true, and there were these various allegations, and maybe I crossed a line, but I apologize, I've changed, I've repented, and as Gingrich has done, I found religion. You know, Gingrich has constructed a redemption story, and if you talk to these, Christian conservative activists out in Iowa who are now giving life to his campaign, that's what they say. Ours is a faith of forgiveness. Newt Gingrich has come to us saying, I'm a changed man, I have a wife, I take my family seriously, and they're that desperate to turn on Romney, they'll go with that.
But then doesn't that argue that perhaps what Cain's last play might be, since he's tried everything else, and he has, to get his credit, he hasn't listened to anybody. I've told him, you're gone, you got to get out of here. He hasn't done it all along, through all the missteps, through Becky, Stan, and all the rest of it. Is his best play tomorrow to get on live TV, wherever this announcement is, and drop to his knees and repent in front of everybody and start crying, and I have a doing a full Jimmy Swaggart?
Jimmy Swaggart move. Yeah, well, I mean, I think the problem is and I think you probably know this in politics, nothing hastens a demise in the polls like the perception of a demise in the polls.
Right.
And tomorrow there's going to be a poll that comes out in Iowa by sort of the authoritative poll in Iowa by the Des Moines Register that's going to show Herman Cain at 8% in the Republican side. It was 23 just a couple weeks ago. So the guy's lost 2/3 of his support even before the full weight of this thing hit. And I think when you start getting news reports like that, it sends a message to Republican voters, this train has lost its steam. Gingrich is the ascendant one. If you don't want Romney, that's where you got to line up.
Well, what happens if he drops to his knees and just says, you've got to forgive me? Don't they perhaps? I mean, it might, if he wants to extend this and keep selling those books, and it's good for another week.
Right. No, I think you're outlining actually what might be a good strategy there, which is why I'm pretty sure Cain will not employ it.
That's right. I'll just send him an email. I have his home number. Salon News Editor Steve Kornacki. Great. Thanks for coming in.
Sure.
Have a good weekend. For more now on this Newsmax GOP debate, the one that Donald Trump, for God's sakes, is going to host, I'm joined by Tim Dickinson, national political correspondent for Rolling Stone. Tim, thanks for your time tonight.
Good to be with you.
All I've been reading all day is something like this. This is National Fritters Day, December 2nd. We always celebrate National Fritters Day with a practical joke. It's like April Fool's Day. It hasn't happened. This is not a practical joke?
It's hard to believe it. It really defies satire. You have a billionaire who makes money firing people on national television, getting to grill the GOP candidates about how much they're going to cut his taxes and how much is going to be left over for little Ivanka once the Donald kicks it and the socialite becomes an heiress. So this is sort of like the singularity of all that's going on with GOP policymaking right now. It's just too hard to understand, frankly.
Let's say he was a brilliant man, or at least half as brilliant as he thinks he is, or even has some credibility on most of his major areas and didn't just stumble into a lot of cash and get saved from bankruptcy a couple of times. Let's say he had some legitimacy. Isn't the persona a little difficult to be having done this once myself and having to bite my tongue throughout a Democratic debate where I wanted to jump in and follow up and the procedure didn't allow it, or even interrupt and the procedure didn't allow it? How does Donald Trump, who makes his living not listening to other people, moderate a debate in which he has to ask questions and then give him a chance to answer?
I have no idea. I think this is going to be like, I think of the egos of all the parties involved kind of like balloons at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, and so I think we're going to be watching collisions of that all night. It's going to be must-see TV.
Yes, in a 40-mile-an-hour windstorm.
Exactly.
Knocking over light poles and passersby. Is there any reaction from those other balloons? Any reaction from the candidates? Are they going to show for this? We know there's 50 of these debates left. Is December 27th a key one? Is it because of the date? Is it the Christmas debate? What are they saying?
Well, I mean, it's right before the Iowa caucuses, essentially, and so this is going to be a last chance to communicate to voters. John Huntsman, to his credit and to his electoral strategy, which doesn't depend on Iowa, has said he's going to sit this one out and get a big bowl of popcorn and watch Mitt and Newt suck up to the Donald. I think that was the exact quote.
Hello, I'm Donald Trump, and my guests tonight are Herman Cain and Tim Pawlenty. Bachmann, Perry, Romney, they've all had these meetings with Trump with a lot of cameras, publicity, and orange hair there. And Trump, of course, when he was staging his own sort of mock candidacy, he briefly was atop the polls. Have you been able to define what his appeal is to the GOP? Is it purely braggadocio and bravado? Is that what they're looking for?
You know, I think he says something about, you know, he's the everyman's billionaire. He's the guy that Joe the plumber thinks he might be someday if his plumbing business were real and then took off. You know, plus this, I mean, you know, the size of his ego and just the way that he speaks, it gets into this, you know, he's just very much of a piece with the rest of this crew.
I just don't. He inherited most of that money. I know one of his buildings very well, and it's very well run, and it's a nice staff, and there's not too much gold on it, and they're good people, and it's not a bad product. But my goodness, he inherited most of his riches. He's not a self-made or Republican kind of story. But
he's the guy who gets out there and does motivational talks in front of crowds. I mean, he's the guy who's out there on TV, and you watch him, you know, in your underwear. So he's the accessible billionaire. I think it's kind of the way to understand it.
I wouldn't watch him in his underwear. A very politically astute friend of mine heard of this today and responded, "We are living in an Onion story, I swear." In light of this, in light of the Cain thing, do you get that feeling about the whole GOP race, like we're just sitting here waiting for the real candidate to show up and announce that the parody part of it is over?
Well, you know, I have expected this event, they're going to draw open the curtain and Jeb Bush is going to come out and you know, take on the challengers. Or maybe, you know, Bob Dole will come out as a veteran of past seasons and we'll get all of the TV reality show crew together here. But, I mean, this is just a joke, and it builds on the joke of the Herman Cain campaign and his map of foreign policy and adversary regimes. I mean, just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder, the Donald comes in.
Harold Stassen's dead, so he can't pop in at the last minute either. Tim Dickinson of Rolling Stone, just 25 days till Trump proves there's another thing on TV he can't do well. Thank you, Tim. Have a good weekend.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Keith.
Did you know there's a 24-hour-a-day police detail outside Fox News headquarters, a detail paid for by New York City taxpayers? But now in Wisconsin, if you want to protest Governor Scott Walker's brand of cheesehead fascism, you have to pay for the police that he will send to try to break up your protest. Next on Countdown. The tone deaf usually tone it down, not Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin, who is now going to charge protesters for the cost of the cops who will harass them. And look at me when I'm talking to you. Nearly 6 weeks after his injury at Occupy Oakland, 5 days after his first interview at Occupy Oakland, Scott Olsen joins me live. What does he do when his worldview requires that unemployment cannot improve, but unemployment drops by nearly half a point? He lies about it on his TV channel. And the return of Fridays with Thurber and his haunting story, Memorial. In Terry Gilliam's 1984-like comedy, Brazil, the futuristic totalitarian state he depicts not only breaks down your door and tortures you, but it then also sends you a bill. In our fourth story in the countdown, the movie did not claim to depict Wisconsin in the year 2011, but it could have. Governor Scott Walker now wants to charge protesters for the time of the police who will monitor them and presumably pepper spray them. The new policy also holds demonstrators at the Capitol responsible for the costs of cleanup and repair. Groups of protesters inside state buildings, and 4 people constitute a group, need permits and must apply 72 hours in advance. If you want to protest outside and you have a group of 100 or more, you'll also need a permit. The rules took effect Thursday and will be phased in by December 16th. Waves of protests have engulfed the state capitol ever since Walker and the state's other Republican legislators passed a law last February, effectively ending collective bargaining rights for most public workers. That led to the successful recall of 2 GOP state senators, and now there's an effort to recall the governor as well. Anti-Walker activists have so far gathered more than 300,000 of the necessary 540,000 more signatures needed by January 17th to force the special election. And that's not Walker's only problem at the moment. The annual tree lighting this morning didn't go so smoothly either. In fact, the tree lighting has turned into a political football. Only in Wisconsin, protesters turned their backs as the governor lit the tree. Afterwards, a small group of protesters hung a massive recall sign over the second-floor railing in the rotunda. One Democratic state senator complained about the timing of the ceremony, saying Walker purposely held the event in the morning rather than the traditional noontime ceremony schedule in order to avoid protests. Can't imagine why he'd want to do that. The governor's office said the earlier time was in fact just due to scheduling conflicts. Roughly 200 people attended the ceremony, which also honored military members for their service. Normally 5 times that number would have been in attendance. Walker also broke tradition by declaring the thing a Christmas tree. It had been called a holiday tree since 1985. Joining me now is Graeme Zielinski, Communications Director of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. Thanks for your time tonight, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Howdy.
Yeah, we may be related. I have a great-grandfather named Zielinski, but we'll talk about that later on. Is this essentially, you can have your First Amendment rights as long as you pay? I mean, only the rich could exercise their rights in Wisconsin. How on earth could this be legal?
Well, I don't know that it is. It's nuts. This guy's running the place like a banana republic, but this is more of the same from this guy. He's shut down the Capitol, turned it into sort of a police state. Any kind of dissent he wants to quash, any kind of speech he doesn't like, he tries to get rid of. It's not somebody who has a history of honoring democratic principles or debate. You see it in the recall right now. They're trying all these late game changes to screw up the process. So it's the banana republic of Scott Walker here in Wisconsin right now.
The office of the governor is saying this is simply a policy clarification, that there are existing rules that say public officials may issue permits for the use of state facilities, and applicants, and here's the quote, shall be liable to the state for any expense arising out of any such use and for such sum as the managing authority may charge for such use. Is that just a convenient excuse, or did somebody find this and say, oh boy, we can charge protesters for their police?
I think that sounds like it's out of the Kremlin. I mean, the protesters that are protesting, let's talk about it. These are kids with autism. These are poor people who can't afford this. These are some of the people he's kicked off of Medicaid, which here is called Badger Care, just in time for Christmas. These aren't folks who have a lot of money. And this is a state that's been turned into a rent-to-own province of the Koch brothers industries. And this is very clearly meant to quash dissent.
One Republican state senator has said that the law will be administered with common sense. We can debate whether or not that's plausible in Wisconsin at the moment, but does that just essentially allow the police the jurisdiction to keep the opposing groups out and let the friendly groups in?
Well, I think the Tea Party rage muffins, who, by the way, had the run of the Capitol before, when we had a Democratic governor, the Capitol was wide open. They came in and made their little tantrums, had their little tantrums in all the Democratic offices. The Capitol was wide open when they wanted to do their little displays. But the idea that you want to cede all power to the state to decide when dissent can be allowed, isn't that totally against the rage muffin principle of limited government?
It's a funny thing. There's a story up at the Daily Beast right now. City of New York has a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week police presence in one business location in this city because it's highly political. The cost is estimated to be at least $500,000 a year to the taxpayers, and there hasn't been anybody calling for the people in the place, which is a for-profit business, not a bunch, as you suggested, of autistic kids or Occupy protesters, whatever. It's a for-profit business. Nobody said you got to reimburse the city. The place is the headquarters of Fox News. Is this not a lesson that the costs of this are just part of what government pays in a democratic society?
Well, it seems pretty un-American that you got to have a price tag on dissent, especially when you have a governor here. By the way, Fox News gave $1 million to the Republican Governors Association, which supported Scott Walker. So maybe they can help pick up the tab. Maybe Fox News can come here and help us have protests.
How do you get, by the way, how do you decide that a group of protesters is a group of protesters when they reach 4 or more people? Is that just a family tour of the Capitol?
Does not the Bible say whenever 3 or more are gathered in my name?
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous. It's absurd, and it's on its face absurd.
And this tree lighting today, is there anything the governor has gotten right? I mean, how can he turn the tree lighting into a political disaster?
Well, I mean, he wants to make it a Christmas tree, which is another divisive act. I mean, that's fine. But if our Lord was born in Wisconsin today, he'd be kicked off of Badger Care, which is our Medicaid program. That's how Christmassy this guy is.
Oh, goodness. Wisconsin Democratic Communications Director Graeme Zielinski. My Zielinskis are from Krakow. Where were yours from?
Kraków. Jeszcze Polskie nie zginęła.
Okay, so it's very possible. All right. Have a good weekend, cousin.
I'll still hit you up for a loan.
You got it. Thanks. Scott Olsen coming up. Injured Occupy Oakland protester Scott Olsen joins me next. First, the sanity break, and on this date 20 years ago today, The New York Mets signed free agent outfielder Bobby Bonilla to a then-record 5-year, $29 million contract. After 3.5 controversial seasons in New York, the Mets offloaded Bonilla only to bring him back in 1999. A year later, still owing him nearly $6 million on his next contract, the Mets bought him out of the deal by agreeing to defer the remaining payments with interest until July 1st of this year. So now Bonilla gets $1,193,000 a year from the Mets through the year 2036, when he will be 73. Might be able to hit still. Time marches on. We begin with a trip to Grandma's house. It's Thanksgiving, and while all the adults are watching football, little Patrick gets thirsty. Oh, here's some fresh water. Okay, it's cute, but at some point, shouldn't somebody give the kid a ladle? Or just a straw? It's a lot more impressive later on when the dog sat in a high chair and drank out of a sippy cup. We travel to China, where this little pig went to the market on 2 legs. Born earlier this year, this pig that the locals call Piggy the Strong doesn't let his challenge stop him from getting where he wants to go. Sure, sometimes they help him out. What are you doing? I'm driving a pig. What does it look like I'm doing? But, of course, he does a good job on his own. All right, that's enough hogging of the camera. Finally, it's the TMO adorable clip of the day. Nothing at the end of a long day like a nice soak in the bathtub. And if, like Casper here, you're able to find somebody to shampoo your belly at the same time, even better. Turn the guys off, the camera off, guys. I'm trying to relax here. Little known fact, this is also the same way they clean Rush Limbaugh. Time marches on. By the way, that's half of the greatest obscene joke the late Bill Hicks ever told. Look it up on the internet if you dare. Scott Olsen next. Dumont's thrilling new game show, Down You Go, will not be seen tonight, so we can instead bring you Countdown, the longest continuously running 8 p.m. news hour on cable, unless you consider Fox News. We're live each night at 8 Eastern. We call it our little leadership team. Police forces across the country continuing to crack down on Occupy protests, though none acting as violently as Oakland's police did 5 weeks ago in its brutal treatment of our next guest, Scott Olsen. In our third story tonight, even as police continue to raid camps and make arrests, protesters persevere, some now even directly confronting high-ranking politicians and banks. In Tampa, 29 protesters arrested last night after refusing to leave a park there. Meantime, in Boston, 3 arrested after Occupy members brought a large sink to the encampment, police saying they were not allowing new construction material and, quote, took custody of the property. A sink. It is now everything, including the kitchen sink. Despite the ongoing crackdowns, occupiers now taking their movement to politicians themselves. Protesters interrupting Herman Cain's speech at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro last night.
I want to be president of something for somebody somewhere, doing anything as long as it's legal. I had achieved my dream to become a VP. VP. Y'all done yet?
Given how it's been going, Cain was probably happy to be interrupted there, but he was not the only politician being occupied. Protesters in Washington marching on a Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee fundraiser last night to call attention to the influence of big money in politics at the event where tickets reportedly went for as much as $75,000. Representative Donna Edwards, the Democrat of Maryland, who attended the event, expressing her support for the movement, saying she wants public financing of elections to eliminate the need for high-priced fundraisers.
I stand by the 99%. I stand by the 99%. In my district. In my district. Are the 99%. Are the 99%. People who've lost their homes. People who lost their homes. People who've lost their jobs. People who lost their jobs. It's not fair. It's not fair. It's not right. It's not right. And it's time for us to occupy America. It's time for us to occupy America.
The movement now spreading from the streets to foreclosed homes. Occupy Rochester, that's in New York State, has been holding protests outside each one such home and also the local Wells Fargo branch, demanding the bank negotiate with its owners. Earlier this week, following public outcry, that family there was given an additional 30 days to work out an agreement. Occupy Oakland now trying to do the same for 75-year-old Josephine Tolbert, who fell behind on her mortgage payments after she was diagnosed with cancer. Police there blocking the entrance to her home. Speaking of Occupy Oakland, joining me now as promised, Scott Olsen, the Iraq War vet whose skull was fractured at an Occupy Oakland rally in late October. Scott, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm glad we can do this. Thanks for your time tonight.
Howdy, Keith. Glad to be here.
How are you feeling, and how people who saw that interview that you did over the weekend at Occupy Oakland, how fast are you getting better? Let me put it that way.
It's difficult to say. Every time I run into somebody new who I haven't seen for quite a while, they're surprised how much I'm doing better. Every time I check in with my doctors, every time I check in with any friends, they see the change faster than I do.
I would imagine that's true. Do you find it frustrating, or has the support that you've gotten nationwide actually contributed to this process? Not to have everybody pat themselves on the back, but I mean, has it been of any practical value to you?
Well, it's frustrating at times, but the support has been such a great help to me. Just going home and reading a new card, I've still got a whole stack to get through, and support from vet groups and like VFP or IVAW has been outstanding, and it's been helping me get way better.
How clear a picture do you have of how much support there is and how much you've come to represent not just Occupy Oakland, but Occupy in general?
Well, I mean, I've got this idea, but it's a bit hard to get my head around. I was out on the streets of San Francisco today, and 3 or 4 people who you wouldn't expect to be involved with politics, you know, they recognized me and they sought me, and it's always a surprise to me.
Yeah, I would think so. What does that mean to you when people think of you as part of maybe the essence of Occupy?
I mean, it's important to me because, you know, I am a part of it. We all are, and it's important for us all to be a part of it and embody those values that we hold true.
Tell me what was it particularly that drew you to Occupy Oakland in the first place?
Just really the community involved and the diversity of opinions. You know, everybody you talk to there is going to have a different opinion, and you can always learn something new from talking to somebody else.
I don't know if you know this name, Sergeant Shamar Thomas. Oh, good. Well, then you know what he did here in New York, and he became famous for it because he stood up to the cops and he said, with real vigor but real politeness towards them, you know, there's no excuse for you to behave like this. This is not a battlefield. He knew battlefields. You know battlefields. Does the degree of militarization of the police at Occupy protests, obviously that had an impact on you personally, but in a broader sense, does it shock you that you're seeing this on the streets of this country?
I don't know. It's on one hand, it shocks me a lot. On the other hand, it doesn't, because our nation's peace officers have been militarized over the past 10 years to combat terrorism, but they're combating anybody with an opinion.
Relative to your opinion and these protests, do you have plans, you have hopes about resuming participating in some regular way, or what do you want to do with this as it goes forward?
I'm excited to get back involved, and I'm trying to plan on how I can get back involved and be an asset to the Occupy movement. But, you know, I have to make sure I stay safe.
Well, you're already an asset. You don't have to worry about achieving that. You're sort of like practical, in the field kind of thing. Let me sum it up this way. What do you want, having been through all that you've been through involved in this, what do you want to see Occupy achieve? Long-term, short-term, however you want to put it.
I mean, really, I just want to see more people get involved with real democracy, to build a democratic nation. With that, I think we need to end our wars, all of them, and that'll do our country a great service.
Scott Olsen, we wish you, all of us here, everybody's watching, we wish you the best as your recovery continues, and obviously we thank you for your bravery in getting involved in this and for doing these interviews, and of course thank you for your original service as well.
Thank you, Keith.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, the man behind the Republicans' pledge not to raise taxes explains why it's okay for Republicans to raise taxes anyway. Worst person's ahead. Bathtub boy tells Republican congressman that just because they want to raise taxes on the middle class, that does not mean they are violating their pledge to him to not raise taxes. And it's Fridays with Thurber and his eloquent tribute to a dog memorial ahead. One of the loveliest pieces of writing James Thurber ever did, memorial next. First, because these next miscreants have never had any connection at all to the word loveliest. Here, countdown top 3 nominees for today's worst persons in the world. The bronze to right-wing nutjob Dan Gaynor of the laughably titled Media Research Center. This is a little old, but given what he's implying, it's still valid. This is the man who once offered $100 on Twitter to whoever punched then Congressman Alan Grayson, then claimed he was joking. Obviously, this tweet reinforces the idea that Gaynor has a serious anger management issue. Occupy Wall Street seems determined to learn just how much right supports Second Amendment, hashtag Occupy DC, hashtag NRA. The implied call to violence, I understand. Gaynor's got a violence fantasy. Although you'll notice, he always wants somebody else to actually do the violence. He just likes to watch. What I never get about these psychos, though, is why they think the people they're trying to talk into shooting somebody would not be charged with a crime. The runner-up, Roger Ailes, proprietor of the political whorehouse that is Fox News. If the propaganda arm of the Republican Party is to defeat President Obama next year, it is essential that the unemployment numbers do not improve. So what did Ailes do today when unemployment numbers did improve? When they dropped from 9% to 8.6% in November, he rounded up. Look at this, courtesy Media Matters. Right off Fox News. 8.6 rounded up is 9%. Seriously, the voiceover for this by the Stepford wife, Gretchen Carlson, was correct. But this is what you saw if you were watching their TV station. When people compare Fox News to the Ministry of Truth from the book 1984, they're insulting Fox News. Orwell's Ministry of Truth wasn't nearly as effective as Ailes' Fox News is. Speaking of effective, our winner right-wing anti-tax guru Grover Norquist, the man who helped to kill the Republican Party. Norquist met with Republican congressmen to tell them that, yes, they've signed his pledge saying you can't raise taxes, but that the raising of taxes that would occur if they let the payroll tax cut expire wouldn't really be a raising of taxes. National Journal's Billy House tweeted, Norquist advises a room full of Republican members Thursday that a failure to extend the payroll tax should not be viewed as raising taxes. This is like a 16th century pope trying to clarify why the sun does too revolve around the earth despite, the reality. Mr. Norquist is, of course, Bathtub Boy, the buffoon who once said, I don't want to abolish government, I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub. Shall we start with those Republican anti-tax increase members who you just told to support a tax increase? Grover Norquist, today's worst person in the world. So much of James Thurber's writing was so original, so inventive, so much a standard setter for even the humorists who write today, that we can't forget just how good it is. And nothing focused his pen like dogs. And perhaps nowhere in his volumes of work is that focus clearer than in tonight's selection. This is from My World and Welcome to It, first published in 1937, and I'm reading it from a 1979 paperback version of the book. Listen carefully as Thurber goes from humor to sarcasm to nostalgia to a deft, remarkable analysis of the universal dilemma that is mortality in Memorial by James Thurber. She came all the way from Illinois by train in a big wooden crate 13 years ago, a frightened black poodle, not yet a year old. She felt terrible in body and worse in mind. These contraptions that men put on wheels in contravention of that law of nature which holds that the feet must come in contact with the ground in traveling dismayed her. She was never able to ride 1,000 yards in an automobile without getting sick at her stomach, but she was always apologetic about this frailty, never, as she might well have been, reproachful. She tried patiently at all times to understand man's way of life, the rolling of his wheels, the raising of his voice, the ringing of his bells, his way of searching out with lights the dark, protecting corners of the night, his habit of building his beds inside walls, high above the nurturing earth. She refused, with all courtesy, to accept his silly notion that it is better to bear puppies in a place made of machined wood and clean blue cloth than in the dark and warm dirt beneath the oak flooring of the barn. The poodle was hand in glove with natural phenomena. She raised 2 litters of puppies, 11 each time, taking them in her stride the way she took the lightning and the snow. One of these litters, which arrived ahead of schedule, was discovered under the barn floor by a little girl of 4. The child gaily displayed on her right forearm the almost invisible and entirely painless marks of teeth, which had gently induced her to put down the live black toys she had found and wanted to play with. The poodle had no vices that I can think of, unless you could count her incurable appetite for the tender tips of the young asparagus in the garden and for the black raspberries when they ripened on the bushes in the orchard. Sometimes, as punishment for her depredations, she walked into bees' nests or got her long, shaggy ears tangled in fence wire. She never snarled about the penalties of existence or whimpered about the trials and grotesqueries of life with man. She accepted gracefully the indignities of the clipping machine, which in her maiden days periodically made a clown of her for the dog shows, in accordance with the stupid and unimaginative notion, inherited from the drunken Romans, that this most sensitive and dignified of animals is at heart a fool. The poodle, which can look as husky as a Briard when left shaggy, is an outdoors dog and can hold its own in the field with the best of the retrievers, including the Labrador. The poodle won a great many ribbons in her bench days and once went best of breed at Madison Square Garden, but she would have traded all her medals for a dish of asparagus. She knew it was showtime when a red rubber bib was tied around her neck. That meant a ride in a car. I used to ride with her in the rumble seat, and once on our way to Newport when the rain came down suddenly, there was I with one hand on the poodle's shoulder and the other holding over her a bright green parasol. The highways of New England have, I am sure, seldom beheld a more remarkable sight. Like the great Gameyer of Tarkington's Gentle Julia, the poodle I knew sometimes seemed about to bridge the mysterious and conceivably narrow gap that separates instinct from reason. She could take part in your gaiety and your sorrow. She trembled to your uncertainties and lifted her head at your assurances. There were times when she seemed to come close to a pitying comprehension of the whole troubled scene and what lies ticking behind it. If poodles, who can walk so easily upon their hind legs, ever do learn the little tricks of speech and reason, I should not be surprised if they made a better job of it than man, who would seem to be slowly slipping back to all fours in spite of Van Wyck Brooks and Lewis Mumford and Robert Frost. The poodle kept her sight, her hearing, and her figure up to her quiet and dignified end. She knew that the hand was upon her, and she accepted it with a grave and unapprehensive resignation. This, her dark, intelligent eyes seemed to be trying to tell me, is simply the closing of full circle. This is the flower that grows out of beginning. This, not to make it too hard for you, friend, is as natural as eating the raspberries and raising the puppies and riding into the rain. Memorial by James Thurber. In New York, I'm Keith Olbermann. Please have a great weekend. Good night and good luck.